What are you doing? Perhaps you want to know how overtime and double time are calculated if you're working or you're an employer and you want to figure out, oh, my employee works more than 8 hours a day sometimes, more than 40 hours a week sometimes. Sometimes they work more than 12 hours a day. Sometimes they're going to work 7 days in a row. There are laws. We're going to focus on the state of California, but a lot of their laws kind of apply to other states as well. So let me tell you, I spent the last 6 hours programming all the formulas to do this, and oh my God, it is insane. So, if you are an employer that has to deal with this, or you're an employee that wants to check up on your employer to make sure that they're calculating your hours correctly, you might want to copy this file and you should buy one. I'll make it not that expensive, but wait till you see all these formulas. Wait till you see this. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. This is literally what you have to do to figure this out. Oh my God, it's crazy. So let's talk about how you fill out this file and how you figure out weekly versus daily overtime. And we'll go through it in such an extensive manner, you will not believe how much you're going to learn about overtime and how to calculate it correctly. So it's going to be a long video. Get ready. I'm sorry, but it just has to be. So in this file, you need to put in information about your employee. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but name, Barry Gibb, we're going to focus on the Bee Gees today. We're going to be staying alive. Are they married? Did they file out a W-4 for 2020? Any state allowances? What state are they in? California. State filing status for California. Your W-4 information. All that's got to get filled in here. Once you have that, you have an employee record, and you can start doing things like entering in daily hours. So let's get to it. Let's get rid of these first two records right here, and I'll show you what we're going to do. So first thing you do is you're going to pick your employee name. It's going to come up on a drop-down list. We have Barry right in there, Barry Gibb, right? And we're also going to put the day that he is working. Now, sometimes you may be working graveyard shift, some type of shift where you're working over 2 specific days. Well, if you're going to do that, let's say that on January 1st of this year, you do this. And maybe you started the day at 0000 hours, right? 0 o'clock in the morning. You started at midnight on January 1st. And say you worked till... So you did a normal 8-hour shift, okay? 8:00, you're doing military time and he ran this stuff in. And maybe you had a 30-minute lunch break in there. You just put your lunch break in there and you've put a record in. Well, what happens if you come back and you start another shift that night that goes into Thursday? You're starting, so let's say you come in at 2200, 10 o'clock, and you don't put that you went all the way till say 6 in the morning the next day. You're just going to put 24 or 00. It's going to do the same thing whether you use 2400 or 0. Let's say you didn't have any breaks or any unpaid breaks here. This is going to automatically start calculating all the things that matter when it comes to overtime and double time. So here's the way many of the rules work in California. You have to calculate what the overtime would be based on a daily, tracking it daily, meaning did the person work more than 8 hours in a day? Well, in this instance, they do work more than 8 hours. They actually work over here. They work 9.5 hours on this day. They work 7.5 in the morning, and then they work another 2 at night. And that comes out to 9.5. What I've done with these formulas, and I cannot explain to you what all these formulas are doing because it will drive you insane, and it was really complicated. For me to spend 6 hours on something, which I thought was going to be relatively easy, that's how crazy insane this is. You're probably going to want my file. I didn't see too many things on YouTube that did this automatically like I've programmed here in Microsoft Excel, so wait till you see what all this is doing. What it's doing is it's figuring out first in the daily format, well, how many of these hours were overtime for the day? If they were more than 8 for the day, then they're going to start to get thrown into this overtime column automatically. And if they were more than 12 in any given day, they're going to end up going into this double time category here, right? So like you've got 8 regular hours, you've got 4 overtime hours, and you've got 1.5 double time hours because these are over 12. And all these complicated formulas are doing that per day, all right? So this is going to give you the daily assessment of how many hours were overtime, over 8, how many hours were double time over 12 and populate it there. Well, that would be all good and fine and super easy if that was the only way that you had to track overtime and double time hours, but it's not. You also have to track them in what's called the weekly format. The weekly format means, well, if an employee works over 40 hours in the week, we're not talking about days now, we're just talking about 40 hours in a week. Well, all those hours that are over 40 hours in a week have to be considered overtime. And on top of that, if the employee works like 7 days, like a whole straight week, and doesn't get any days off, the the seventh day, the very last day of that pay period, any hours worked over 8 hours have to be considered double time hours. So these formulas are keeping track of the entire pay period week. And if the employee worked a full 8 hours for those 7 days, like did the employee work 8 hours every day, that 7-day work week? And if they did they work more than 8 hours on the 7th day? And if they did, you got to make that stuff double time over here. It's doing all this, all right? So it is figuring out based on your daily or your weekly format what your hours were and whether or not they were regular, overtime, or double time. So you think, all right, great, we've done both of that. That's awesome. Now what do we do? Well, now you have to figure out which one pays your employee more, because legally you are required to pay your employee the combination, whether it was weekly, the way you were calculating overtime weekly format, or whether you were calculating it in a daily format. You have to pay them the most, basically, whichever situation resulted in them making more money. So after you enter in all your time and all your day here, you can go over to this hours pivot sheet. And what the hours pivot sheet is an automated report that you can refresh. And when you refresh it, it is totaling up all your daily regular hours, daily OT hours, daily double time hours based on the daily way of calculating things. And it's also doing the same thing based on the weekly way of calculating things. And you know what you get? You get something up here. And it says that in this scenario for this pay period, because certain pay periods also don't align with your weeks. That's the other thing I didn't even talk about. Didn't even talk about that, but it's also really complicated. One of the reasons that your employer or you may have difficulty doing this is when your pay period, for example, is semi-monthly, which is what's going on in this file right now, your weeks tend to bleed over different pay periods. And it gets really complicated because when you're calculating overtime, you need to be thinking of only a 7-day standard week. The government does not care if you pay your people biweekly, semi-monthly, or monthly. You have to look at the 7-day period and whether or not they worked more than 8 hours a day during that period, or worked more than 40 hours a week, or worked 7 days straight, all those things we were just mentioning. So this here is sifting out and kind of showing when a pay period bleeds, or a week bleeds over 2 pay periods in this sense, which is what's happening here. So anyway, going back to the pivot sheet, this sorts it all out for you so that you can easily see what is happening. And what is happening here is you can toggle from different pay periods to see an entire pay period, and what the OT type hours, or the regular OT and double time hours, when you multiply them by their respective ratios, meaning a regular hours multiplied by 1 and overtime hours multiplied by 1.5, a double time hour is multiplied by 2, you get up here a sum of whether or not you should be paying your employee by daily overtime hours or bi-weekly overtime hours. It's whichever one is bigger. So let's do a little conditional formatting icon set with a, yep, there it is. You should be paying your employee by daily overtime method, which is going to be these hours down here in the daily reg area. And that's what it's doing automatically. If it was a weekly, oh, here's one where the weekly is better. In pay period 125, essentially it's a weekly, probably because the employee works for 7 days straight in this scenario, and therefore they get more double time on the last day. That's probably why this worked out. Yeah, they end up having 6.5 double time hours and, 42 overtime hours. I assume this is right. But in this scenario, the weekly overtime comes out being better because, yep, 57, 23. Yeah, you end up having more weekly overtime hours this scenario because you're well over 40 and because you worked so many different days. That's why. That's what has to do with this, is if you're working a lot of days, 6, 7 days, you tend to not get credit for all that overtime if, say, you did 8-hour days, right? Say you do 7 days at 8 hours a day, you do 56 hours. Well, if you were calculating that using daily overtime requirement, you never hit any overtime because you do 8 hours a day. That's it, right? That's why you also have to look at this from the weekly view, because you really did work 56 hours in that scenario. And so 16 of those should be overtime, maybe even more depending on if you worked more on that final 7th day. Some of that may be, actually, no, it's all 8 on every day. So you should get 16 hours of overtime and 40 hours of regular. Point is, when you figure out which one of these you should use, you can then take those numbers and easily put them into the rest of the payroll file. So for example, on 125, let me show you how this works exactly. 125, these are the numbers that you should be using because it said use the weekly. So you copy that and you go over to the pay period records sheet, and that's this week right here. And instead of 57.75, 23, and 8, you need to paste this stuff over. Boom. That's what it's supposed to be. And your pay stub for that period, if you go to the pay stub sheet, you'll see that this pay stub is now grossing out at 1745 and you get 1583. So it's 1745 gross, 1583 is your check. Let's see what happens if we whip back and we override these formulas, and it will go back to the way it was calculating using daily overtime method. Let's see if that's more or less money. It's less money. Told ya. Told ya, it's less money. So this is a super complicated way to automatically, all these formulas that I spent time on, I can put these into the file and sell it to you, and you can use it. You will be able to do this. So I would imagine if you're doing this by hand, I mean, you see why I still have hair? It's because I don't pull my hair out trying to add this up on a calendar, on a sheet every single day. I write a formula to do it for me. So you have to use formulas to do this, or I don't even understand how many hours you would spend trying to do this for your employees every single week and every single pay period. So anyway, that is a 12-minute video. Overtime laws can be complicated. You certainly need an easy way to check this stuff out, and I've done that. That's what I spent 6 hours tonight doing. So if you're interested, go to kenbraverman.com, and if you have any questions for me, leave them below. If you want me to try to paste these formulas and show you what I did, honestly, it's too complicated. I mean, look at what's going on here. Look at all this. Ifs and ands and summing and getting days of the week and getting pay periods. That's the other thing, is I built a file that can apply to any different pay period or pay frequency with payroll, and it will automatically tie in all these formulas and make this stuff work automatically. If you're trying to do this yourself, you're going to be dealing with your weeks that bleed over pay periods, and it is just like I said, you're going to pull one follicle out at a time. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and hey, this file could save you a lot of time, I can see. So anyway, we're out. Good luck. Payroll should be easy, so make it so.